What's up? Does life seem really hard to you now? Does it feel like it's just impossible to get things done or to reach the goals that you want or just to be happy? Well, today you're in luck because we're going to talk about is life harder now as opposed to as it was in the past? This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Danny here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny.
And before even that, we do need your help. So if you guys have any ideas for episodes, questions you want us to answer, feel free to email us. You can check that out right in the show notes. You'll find an email that you can reach us at.
Or if you're watching
That's
on
it.
YouTube, you can comment on the
Oh yeah.
video.
That's also a good idea. Commenting's good. Yeah, what do you think? So I've been thinking about this. I don't know. I had this conversation the other day, and I know we talked about this before, but like we always
Well,
look at the
well, back
past.
in my day, we had to walk to
Yeah.
school in the snow, uphill both ways.
No shoes. We just had to use newspapers that we tied
Right.
around our feet with rubber band.
Yeah.
Yeah, you always, well, yeah, I guess that's the funny part, right? You always hear people talk about how it was always harder when they were kids. But I was even thinking longer, further back, like before technology and stuff, life was definitely hard in the sense that, like, you know, you didn't have all these conveniences. Food was an issue, right? You could die literally from starvation in the winter. You could die from lack of preparation. So many things could harm you. You could die from a cut. But I do wonder because, like, we've also changed like our valuations for things so much that we don't do things that directly correlate to our own needs as an individual. And I think there must have been more purpose there. Like if you go out and grow your own food, make your food, and that food enables you to survive, you have purpose right there. Like you've done something that's naturally necessary. You've done all the things to satisfy it, and that probably feels really good. But now everything's like abstracted.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Life was more inherently satisfying back then because you actually had to use your own utility. Like you did stuff. You cleaned your
Yeah.
own house, you cooked and grew your own food, you fixed your own car. Like all these things that you did, yeah, they were a pain, but they felt good when you completed them.
Yeah, and you did the whole thing, right? Like if you wanted furniture, you built it and you could make it as nice or as crappy as you wanted for the need that you had, right? But it was something that you actually created that existed in the world. And
Plus,
it's fun.
advertising did not exist.
Yeah.
It wasn't 24/7 everywhere you go, everything trying to convince you that your life sucks without this thing.
No, right? You maybe had like once in a blue moon, like during a festival, like
Yeah,
somebody would
somebody would
come
be
through
selling
town
some
with a
snake
thing, or
oil.
yeah. Snake
I
oil.
promise it's not piss and ink.
But it's definitely got morphine in it.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
With
Yeah.
just a hint of cocaine.
That's how it works. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's funny. But I think about this a lot because Marx even talks about this too. The idea like when he talks about like the alienation of the worker, he means that like we don't complete anything anymore on our own. Like most people in their work, they serve a small, small part of a larger whole. They never see the completed project. They never do something from start to finish. And so you lose all that value that's associated with that sort of, effort and work and completion of something.
Plus, you know, I an argument could be made that life was more valuable because it was shorter.
Yeah,
Like
that
every year
too.
nowadays is like 1 out of 80, whereas back then every year was like 1 out of 30, 1 out of 20. It was like 5% of your life. Like that's a significant difference as opposed to 1% of your life. And so it probably
Yeah.
made it a lot more significant.
It probably did. Yeah. I mean, how often do you hear now? What was it? There was a president or somebody that just died recently. It was like was it Carter? He was like
Yeah.
100. It might
Hmm.
have been, yeah. I mean, like you hear about people dying at the age of 100 or over. Like it's like a common occurrence now. Or like if you look in the past, like even like and I think about when you study like philosophy and stuff, you're reading a lot of people who had money, right? Because they had time to write and stuff.
Yeah,
So a
most
lot
people
of
died
them
below before like 5 years old, you
Yeah,
know?
most people died, yeah, as children. The ones that made it, most of them would pass, probably before they were 30 or 40. And then you had a few people who maybe had some means and who were doing hard labor that maybe made it until like 60 or so. But you didn't have this like where the majority. So yeah, I think that's also probably it. Maybe the shortness of it made it less of a problem too. Because like now it's like I was thinking about that the other day too. It's like we can start over like so many times
Oh
and
yeah.
have a like if you figure a career if they used to call a career like what like 20 years or so 25 years. I
Hmm.
mean you could effectively have three of those,
Yep.
no problem,
Yep.
in your lifetime, which is insane.
All right, so now that we shat all over the present, what, what, there are things that are good in the present.
There's
Antibiotics.
lots of good things.
Antibiotics.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally revolutionary. Like that one thing alone has just improved the quality of life a millionfold. Because
Oh,
otherwise you get an
access.
infection,
Yeah.
like you scrape your knee and you could just die.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally. I mean, think about that. And they weren't washing their hands or anything. I mean, knowledge of germs.
Hmm.
I mean, look, there's a lot of good things. And like, I know
Well,
I've
let's
read a
list
lot of,
let's list them because we
yeah.
just we just,
Oh no, I was gonna say the major
before
ones,
everybody else just offs themselves from
yeah,
listening to this episode. Like this time does
it's
suck now.
horrible.
I'm done.
The they said I've read reports where they said like the major things that have contributed to longevity of life have been the things you would think of, right? Access to clean water, right? Sewage and sewage treatment, obviously,
Mhm.
because they literally used to just throw it like out their window into the street in cities.
Yeah.
You know, sanitation. I mean, all these things like, and then you mentioned antibiotics was a huge one that really helped. Vaccinations got rid of some really horrible diseases. I mean, there's plenty of good things too.
Okay,
Don't get me wrong.
how about this? So like technology as it's awesome. It's like a double-edged sword,
Everything
essentially.
is.
But like imagine think back to, back before you had like high-speed internet. If somebody told you you could literally like whatever you want to watch or read, you could watch or read it. And you'd be like, "No, that's not possible." Like, no, you
Instantly.
have to like go to the library and they have to order it from the other library and that's going to take at least a month because,
Oh
it's
my God,
pop.
yeah, I remember doing that.
Dude, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I used to get so excited, especially new books, because it took, people would always
Or
get
you
them.
or you'd be like, "Oh, I want to see that movie so bad, but it just came out of the theaters and it's not coming out to the video rental store for another 6 months."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually forgot about that, that there used to be like this long delay, and they wouldn't sell the movies to regular people. They'd sell them to the rental stores first, and then, you could get them much later.
Hmm.
Yeah, we waited for everything, and it wasn't that bad.
No, it was nice.
Well, you got
But
used to it, you know?
but there is something to be said for, having all of it at your fingers. Like I am shocked right now how much uh how many like brilliant people there are who have written books and created courses and stuff like that. Because it's like, okay, so
Yeah.
for instance, I told you I'm messing around with jujitsu again. And
Yeah.
like when I first learned it, it was like 10, 12 years ago. It was from some dude in like a strip mall. You know, I had no idea he knew what he was doing. And looking back on it, he knew some stuff. I mean, he was a black belt, but it, I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
I
I'm
mean,
not sure he was anything much more than a black belt. But now I
plus
can
also
watch.
within black belts, there's got to be degrees of
Yeah.
skill and like,
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Because anybody
and
can get a
ability to
black belt if
teach.
they just stick with it long enough and they do the required material. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but like now I get to learn it from the dude who's literally the coach of world champions. And it's just like, it's night and
Yeah.
day the difference between the explanation. Because I'm seeing like the explanations now and comparing them to back in the time. And like, so that's one of the things that's so much better now. And we both know this stuff with
Oh
computers.
yeah.
Because like learning
Yeah.
computers, it's so much better for learning programming now than like back 20 years ago.
Well, that's part of it is I think, the access to information is awesome because it is a double-edged sword, right? Like social media, the internet, technology in general, it can be a super huge time waster. It can cause stress, cause anxiety, but it can also be a way that you can learn anything. You can access anything. And I think in that sense, like you get knowledge is accessible in a way that it's never been before, where anybody who has internet connection can access, for instance, that guy's videos, right? Anyone, instead of having to go to his gym wherever the hell it is, right? Which is probably, most people don't live in that country. Go there and train in person. You can get videos and do it at home by yourself, if you just want to learn. And I think there is like these opportunities exist that never existed before. But it's also, I think, I've just been thinking about it a lot because I think it's interesting that I think we're probably going to get to a point where we're going to shift in how we think about all this stuff, maybe, potentially, maybe not, where it's healthier and where our sense of maybe happiness and stuff adjusts appropriately with it,
Can you explain what
possibly.
you just meant by that
So
last sentence? Because I
yeah,
don't exactly get that.
well, like so, like how like everything now is tied to usually money, which is
Hmm.
intangible and which we really don't have. We have some control over, not a lot.
All right.
And so it's very easy to
Uh,
feel like,
I
to
actually
not,
heard I actually heard recently that that's kind of like an Anglo-Saxon, like the Protestant work ethic or Calvinism or whatever is
yes.
more of like an Anglo-Saxon type of thing where we attach our worth in order to the value we contribute to the world, whereas a lot of some other cultures don't do that.
Well, that's just it, right? So like, especially in like the US and like some other, I know other countries, right? We attach our worth to what we contribute to the world and to the earnings that we have particularly because so much of like our idea of like success is tied to wealth and tied to, earning. The problem with that though is there's no bar. There's no like limit. So you earn 1 million, well then you just want more, right? And there's always somebody with more money. So there's always reason to be unhappy. And I think adjusting that is what I meant. Like I hopefully eventually we get to a point where that gets adjusted collectively in our minds where we stop thinking of ourselves that way. And I think we'd have the benefits where life could be a lot better. Because I think you can get a lot of those things we were talking about in the past that we were, like we were like doing these things and then getting this value. I think you can get that today with creativity and stuff. Like a lot of people that do creative projects get a lot of value out of it. But the problem is you also have this association with wealth and earnings and with how well things do in the world, all these other things that you don't have control over that
You
then can
know,
also,
yeah. You know what's interesting about this concept of like needing more money is it's generally the people who are selling the idea that you need more money who are saying that money is more fulfilling. Like you look at Tony Robbins and stuff like that. He's like,
yeah.
"Yeah, you need to make more money and pay for my bigger course that'll tell you how much you're missing out on in life because you don't have more and like everything like that." But then, you look at other examples like Alex Hormozy or Alex Becker. Both of them have said that like money sucks. Like Alex Becker but he said, I asked him, what does it feel like to be rich? And he's like, it feels the same as it does to be broke. And here's a guy who's worth somewhere between 10 and $100 million. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
what's the point of being rich if it doesn't improve your life in that aspect? And then Alex Hormozy, he was saying that like, he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was saying, the best car you can have, the most comfortable car is a Chevy Tahoe. The best food is Cheesecake Factory. And it's like, these are all things that pretty much most middle class people could afford and enjoy. And that's like the best of the best. He spent tons of money on stuff, but that's the best of the best.
Well, what you end up getting, right, is like all it ends up being is exclusivity at
Hmm.
some point. Is that, they just price things out to make it so that it feels more special because not everybody can achieve it or reach it, right?
Hmm.
And I think that is, and you're right, like also too, even if you wanted to eat at a really fancy restaurant, most people can save and do that once in a while. It's
And
not like,
also, yeah, sorry for interrupting again,
nay,
but also I think it's really stupid that we ask rich people if money makes you happy.
no shit.
It's like asking a heroin addict or something like, or
Yeah.
like an alcoholic if alcohol makes you happy or something like that. Whereas like we should ask happy people if money makes you happy,
Yeah. No
or if
kidding. We
money's
should ask
worthwhile.
people how to be happy too. That would be helpful, right?
Yeah.
Instead of these. It's funny. I was cool. This came up because for a lot of reasons I was thinking about this issue and like there was a couple things. One, there was a very recent suicide in some famous person. And I was like thinking about that because it's like, from the outside looking in, right? It seems like most people would say like, oh, they have like the life that everybody would want. They have a loving partner, whatever. They have good work, whatever, like that. And so it's always interesting when you see that doesn't clearly matter, right? And then I know it doesn't, obviously. But then you also have, on the other hand, too, we live in such a time where you see all these like super, super wealthy people, but they're workaholics. I mean,
Hmm.
that's all they do.
Yep.
They don't spend time at home. I mean, like, and I think, Musk was a great example. He was sleeping at Twitter
Yep.
when he purchased it. I mean, do you really want to do that? Is that really a good life?
Yeah. And also we like confuse these single aspects of the person with their self. Like
Yeah,
there's no such thing as a self, but like we're just these humans composed of a whole bunch of different things. And when somebody is really successful in one thing, that's great. But like, I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, but like when I was growing up, there was a kid who was like a genius, like literal Mensa genius. But
yeah.
like he shit his pants, and just like it was just like on one level you're like incredible, but that's not everything. And everybody's like that. We're
But
all just
yeah,
a
that's
mix of like
that's
crazy
most
stuff.
people, right? Most of us are going to be pretty good or good at a few things, and then probably really bad at other things. And
Hmm.
I think that's fine. But you're right. I think that's also the problem with like the amount of media we have and its focus. it's so hyper focused on these like very specific one aspects of a person's life without looking at anything else. And everybody knows that. So like that's the other thing, you see people go on talk shows and stuff and talk about these, wealthy people or whatever. They know that they're presenting an image too. So it's like this whole like, dog what are they like dog and pony show, is that what they call it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Where everybody's just playing games and
Not to mention some people are just narcissists
yeah.
and they get like they're sycophants who buy into it. They just build up this image and everybody buys into it because they think that's what it must be.
And then they all want the money.
Yeah. Yeah, but hey, whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
so what was this episode about anyways? Oh, was time
Well,
better back then? It's a tough
I
one
don't think
because we can only
it
look
is.
back at memories and they're not.
Well, and also in like history, we just don't know. Like that's the other funny thing because I think people had a lot of the same problems we have now that they did in the past. And I always think it's funny. It's easy to romanticize because it's funny. Like they did this in the Enlightenment period. It was a lot of people back then that were writers. They look back at ancient Greece as like they romanticized it. They made this ideal place, but they had no idea. They didn't live there. They didn't know what the people were like. They had no clue whether it was like really as they imagined it, and probably it wasn't, let's be honest, versus the reality of living there, which was probably a lot harder.
Yeah. It's really difficult because I look back at this. Like I remember when I first graduated from veterinary school, I had like, $250,000 in debt and no money. And I
Yeah.
remember like when I had saved up $10,000 or something in my bank account, I felt freaking rich. Like I
Yeah.
that was pretty much like the richest I felt in my entire life. Even though arguably I have more money now, I still that moment I felt wealthier. And I would have thought that like, you know, if I got rid of the debt or had more money, then I would feel rich, but it just doesn't correlate that way. So you can't really look back at
No, because you adjust to everything too. And
hmm
I think that's the other problem. Like we have this problem of it's really easy to look back at things and to turn them into something they weren't. I mean, we've so many studies have shown that memories are not perfect. So even looking back at your own life, where you're like, well, it's my life. I remember what it was like to be a child. It's like, yeah, but you were a kid. You weren't an adult. You weren't dealing with how do you pay for your house? How do you pay for your car? You weren't dealing with the stress of like
hmm
everyday life and all. A child is probably going to have less stress in half of your time,
Yeah.
hopefully. So I think it's hard to look back and make these judgments anyway. And then it's also our memory's not accurate either. And then looking back at these way past things, it's like we don't really know. We have an idea,
Okay,
but
so
yeah.
here's the question. If you could stay here in this time or go back to any time while you were living or any time before then, what would you do?
I would stay here.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would. Because I think it's here.
Yeah.
It's it.
I, you know, I do enjoy my life nowadays, but I think it would be really interesting to one of two things. Either one, go back to like right around when Nintendo was coming out and like the Gateway
Oh, that was a
2000,
good
like the
time.
beginning of computers and technology, to like go back then with like the knowledge and passion that I have now. Because back then I wanted to get involved in computers, but I just thought it was impossible. Like I thought you had to be something
Yeah.
special to like, yeah, I thought you had to be a wizard in order to be a programmer or
Oh,
something
I
like
did
that.
too. Yeah, yeah.
So like
Yeah.
now I've seen through the veil and it's exactly like the Wizard of Oz, you know. And so I think that would have been really cool. I also would have really liked to have gone back to like Greek and Roman times. That would
Oh,
have been
there's
sweet.
definitely times that I would have loved to have gone back to. The only caveat there is that I could speak the language. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And
So
not
it's
and not
not a
be a
total
slave. Yeah.
and not just get murdered immediately
Right.
for being some weird guy that they don't
An
understand.
alien. Yeah.
But I do.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because I think a lot of people have this tendency to think back. That's why I wanted to talk about it because I think, you know, we can make this time too, obviously better. There's no reason why we wouldn't be able to. It just, I think now always feels worse because it's like that tendency too to think that like you're living in, what
What, dude?
there was a study that said most people like it's common to think the world's going to end in your lifetime. Like a lot of people have that thought, right? And it's
Mhm.
just because it's like this is our lifetime. It's the most important to us, right? So if
Mhm.
things are going to go bad, they're going to go bad now, type
Yeah.
thing.
But like look at I mean, not appreciating this stuff in the present. Look at the cognitive distortions the mental filter where you focus on the negative and then discounting the positive where you say the positive
Yeah.
stuff doesn't count. So like look at how often we do that stuff in looking at the present because we're like, oh, the politics and the wars
Yeah.
and oh, it's going to hell in a handbasket. And then the positive, you're like, yeah, but that doesn't count because I mean, come on, of course it's going to be that way. And it's like, yeah, but those are errors in thinking.
Yeah. I mean, dude, you go back. That's the funny thing. You go back not even that far in the past, and like literally a cut could turn into like a horrible thing that you end up dying from in a horrible fashion.
Or like best case
Painful.
scenario, you get amputated like
Yeah.
what without anesthesia. Somebody just
And like
takes
a
a
rusty
saw.
saw,
Yeah, they
literally.
take a
Yeah.
saw and just cut off your limb and while you
No,
bite
thank
down
you.
on a piece of wood. Like that's
And
best case
hopefully you're really
scenario.
drunk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. Could you imagine? It'd be terrible.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it's a worthwhile discussion though. Do you have anything
Mhm.
else you want to add to that? So is it better to be, alive now or in the past? I think probably yeah, now is good. And
Yeah.
I think it's a
Let
lot
us
of
know
times
what
just
you
a
think down in the
yeah,
comments and the show
I don't
notes.
know.
Well, no, but you could also email us your thoughts. And if you
You
have
can
any
email.
ideas for episodes, definitely let us know.
Yeah, this is the Existential Stoic podcast. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, though, later, Andy.
Hey, Danny.